Somewhere in the world right now, a group of soldiers is fighting a war. They wear no flag. They answer to no parliament. No general can court-martial them. No citizen can vote them out. Look closely at the convoy moving through that dusty city at dusk. No national insignia. No country name on the door. Just men with guns, moving with purpose, answering to someone you will never meet. So here is the question that should keep you up at night. Who controls men with guns when no country claims them? For most of modern history, we assumed governments held a monopoly on organized military force. That was the deal nations made with their people. We pay taxes. You build an army. The army answers to us. It was imperfect. It was sometimes brutal, but there was a chain. There was a name at the top. There was someone you could hold responsible. That deal has quietly been breaking down for 30 years, and most people have no idea how far it has already gone. These groups are called private military companies. Some people call them contractors, some call them mercenaries. The people who run them prefer phrases like security solutions, providers, or risk management consultants. But whatever name you use, the reality is the same. Armed groups, trained to fight, paid by clients, operating in war zones across Africa, the Middle East, Eastern Europe, and beyond. This is not a fringe phenomenon. This is a multi-billion-dollar global industry operating in the gray space between war and peace, between law and lawlessness. To understand how we got here, you have to go back to the moment the old world order collapsed. When the Soviet Union fell apart in 1991, millions of trained soldiers suddenly had no employer, no mission, and no paycheck. At the same time, Western governments began cutting their defense budgets. Politicians called it the peace dividend. Meanwhile, civil wars were breaking out across Africa and the Balkans, and nobody wanted to send their own troops. Into that vacuum stepped the first generation of modern private military companies. One of the earliest and most well-documented was Executive Outcomes, founded in South Africa in 1989. Their fighters were veterans of apartheid-era special forces units. They knew how to fight, they knew how to win, and they were willing to deploy to Angola and Sierra Leone, not for ideology, not for country, but for money. According to researcher P.W. Singer, writing in his landmark book Corporate Warriors, published by Cornell University Press in 2003, Executive Outcomes represented a new model of warfare, professional, corporate, detached from any national interest, except the interest of whoever was writing the check. The industry grew quietly through the 1990s. Then came the 11th of September 2001, and everything accelerated. The United States invaded Afghanistan, and then Iraq. Both wars required more personnel than the Pentagon wanted to officially put on the books. Private companies were the answer. By 2007, according to a Congressional Budget Office report published in August 2008, there were more private contractors operating in Iraq than uniformed United States soldiers. Read that again. More hired guns than official troops. In the middle of an active war zone, companies like Blackwater, DynCorp, and MPRI became powerful players in Washington. They had lobbyists. They had government contracts worth hundreds of millions of dollars. They had friends in high places. And for a while, the system seemed to be working, at least from the perspective of the governments using them. Private contractors could be deployed faster, paid differently, and most importantly, their deaths did not show up in the official casualty counts that made headlines back home. They were, in many ways, the perfect political tool. Effective, deniable, and invisible to the public that was ultimately paying for them. But invisibility has a cost, and on a busy September afternoon in Baghdad, that cost became impossible to ignore. On September 16th, 2007, Blackwater contractors were escorting a United States diplomatic convoy through the city when they entered Nisour Square, a crowded traffic circle in the Mansour district. Within minutes, they opened fire. When the shooting stopped, 17 Iraqi civilians were dead. Dozens more were wounded. Men, women, people going about their day in a public square, gone. The Iraqi government demanded Blackwater leave the country immediately. The incident triggered congressional hearings in Washington. The FBI launched a criminal investigation. And for the first time, the world was forced to ask a question that the private military industry had spent years hoping nobody would ask. When a hired soldier kills a civilian, who is responsible? Is it the contractor who pulled the trigger? Is it the company that employed him? Is it the government that hired the company? Or does accountability simply disappear somewhere in the chain of subcontracts and classified agreements? The legal answer, it turned out, was deeply unsatisfying. 4 Blackwater contractors were eventually convicted in United States federal court. 2 of those convictions were later appealed and reduced. according to Reuters reporting from August 2020. The process took over a decade. Families of the victims described the outcome as inadequate. And the broader structural question, the question of how to hold private military forces accountable under international law, remained completely unanswered. It still is today. No flag, no rules, no limits. While the Blackwater story was playing out in American courtrooms, a very different kind of private military force was quietly taking shape on the other side of the world. It had no public headquarters. It filed no corporate disclosures. It did not advertise its services in Washington. And yet, within a decade, it would become arguably the most powerful and most dangerous private military organization in modern history. The Wagner Group first appeared in the public record around 2014 in eastern Ukraine, shortly after Russia's annexation of Crimea. Russian law technically prohibited private military companies. The Kremlin officially denied that Wagner existed as a Russian state asset. But investigators at Bellingcat, the open-source intelligence organization, began documenting the group's activities through social media posts, satellite imagery, and financial records. The picture that emerged was striking. Wagner fighters were well-equipped, well-trained, and operating in precisely the areas and at precisely the times that served Russian foreign policy interests. By 2015, Wagner forces were reported in Syria, helping to prop up the Assad government in areas where Russian official forces preferred not to appear directly. By 2019, they were in Libya, supporting the warlord Khalifa Haftar in the ongoing civil war there. And by 2021, they had spread across sub-Saharan Africa with reported deployments in Mali, the Central African Republic, Sudan, and Mozambique. Each deployment was documented by journalists, UN investigators, and regional human rights organizations. Each time, Russian officials either denied involvement or said nothing at all. The Wagner model was different from anything that had come before. It was not simply selling security. According to a United Nations panel of experts report on the Central African Republic published in 2021, Wagner-linked forces were operating in the country under agreements that reportedly included access to gold mines and diamond concessions. This was military power, traded directly for natural resources. An army that paid for itself not with cash, but with control over what lay beneath the ground. In Sudan, similar arrangements around gold extraction were reported by Reuters correspondents on the ground in 2022 and 2023. The human cost of Wagner's expansion was documented in stark detail by human rights investigators. The UN panel of experts reported alleged extrajudicial killings, torture, and the looting of civilian property in areas where Wagner-linked forces operated in the Central African Republic. Villages described men in unmarked uniforms who answered to no local authority, no regional command, and no external oversight body. When violence occurred, there was no complaint process available. There was no number to call. There was simply the fact of armed men doing what armed men do when nobody is watching and nobody is keeping score. In February 2023, a particularly disturbing incident was documented and verified by multiple news organizations including the New York Times and BBC. Video footage purportedly showed the killing of a Syrian man, identified as Mohammed Ismail al-Ismail, by individuals believed to be Wagner-affiliated fighters using a sledgehammer. The footage circulated widely online. The United Nations High Commissioner for Human Rights called for an investigation. No official accountability followed from Russian authorities. The incident illustrated, in the most brutal possible terms, what happens when armed force operates entirely outside any legal framework. Then came the moment that nobody had predicted. On June 23, 2023, Yevgeny Prigozhin, the man widely identified as the founder and leader of Wagner, launched what appeared to be an armed rebellion against Russia's military establishment. His fighters seized control of Rostov-on-Don, a major Russian city. Prigozhin stood down. He went to Belarus. The world exhaled. And then, on August 23, 2023, a private jet carrying Prigozhin crashed northwest of Moscow. All 10 people aboard were killed. Russian aviation authorities confirmed his death. No explanation was offered by the Kremlin. Western intelligence agencies and multiple independent analysts described the crash as almost certainly a deliberate act, though this has not been officially proven and Russia has not acknowledged responsibility. The man who had built the most powerful private army since the Cold War was dead, and the world moved on within a news cycle. But here is what the Prigozhin story actually reveals, beyond the drama and the geopolitics. A private military force had grown large enough, armed enough, and confident enough to march on the capital of the country that had created it. Think about what that means. A tool built for deniability had become a threat to the state itself. The very features that made private armies attractive to governments, their independence, their lack of official status, their freedom from institutional constraints, had turned into a loaded weapon pointed in the wrong direction. This is not an edge case. This is the logical endpoint of building armed power outside the structures of democratic accountability, when the guns have no master. So why, given everything we have just walked through, are private military companies more dangerous than national militaries? The answer is not simply that they commit more abuses, though documented evidence suggests abuses are common and accountability is rare. The deeper answer is structural. It is about what happens to power when you remove the mechanisms designed to control it. Think about a national military for a moment. It is expensive, often bureaucratic, and sometimes deeply flawed, but it exists within a web of constraints. There are military courts. There are parliamentary oversight committees. There are rules of engagement reviewed by legal officers. There are journalists embedded in units. There are veterans who come home and talk. There are elections that can remove the leaders who send troops to war. None of these mechanisms are perfect, but they exist. They create friction. They slow things down. They create moments where someone can say stop. Now think about a private military company. The rules of engagement are in a contract that is usually classified. The Oversight Committee is the board of directors, whose primary legal obligation is to shareholders, not to the civilians in the country where their forces operate. The journalist who wants to embed faces a security non-disclosure agreement. The veteran who comes home faces a confidentiality clause. The election cannot remove the CEO. The friction is gone. And when friction is gone in a system that involves lethal force, the consequences can be catastrophic. International humanitarian law, the body of rules that governs how wars are fought, was designed almost entirely for state actors. The Geneva Conventions, signed first in 1864 and expanded over the following century, assume that armies belong to nations and that nations can be held responsible for what their armies do. The International Criminal Court was built on the same assumption. But a private military company is not a nation, it is a corporation. And the gap between those two categories, in terms of legal accountability for violence, is vast. Legal scholar Chia Leinart, writing in the European Journal of International Law in 2007, argued that this gap is not simply an oversight. It is a space that governments have sometimes deliberately cultivated because it serves their interests to have military capacity that does not come with political accountability. The global market for private military and security services was valued at approximately $224 billion in 2020. Market research firm Grandview Research projected that figure could exceed $400 billion by 2030. To put that in context, the entire defense budget of the United Kingdom in 2023 was approximately $52 billion. The private military industry is not a supplement to national military power anymore. In terms of raw financial scale, it is beginning to rival it. So where does this go from here? Three scenarios present themselves, and each is worth considering clearly. The first and most likely outcome, based on current trends, is continued expansion with minimal regulation. The 1989 United Nations Mercenary Convention, the primary international legal instrument that could theoretically govern this space, has not been ratified by most of the major countries that use private military companies. There is no significant political movement in Washington, London, Moscow, or Beijing to change that. The industry will grow because demand will grow, and the legal framework will continue to lag years behind reality. The second possibility is that a single catastrophic event, something so visible and so undeniable that it forces a political response, triggers a push for a new international framework. History offers one hopeful precedent here. The Ottawa Treaty banning anti-personnel landmines was signed in 1997 by 122 nations, after years of sustained civil society pressure following some particularly high-profile incidents of civilian harm. It is possible that a similar moment could come for private military regulation. The ingredients exist. What is missing is the political will. The third scenario is in some ways the most concerning, because it is already partially underway. The Wagner model demonstrated that a private military force can function as an instrument of great power competition while maintaining official deniability. Russia used Wagner as a foreign policy tool across 3 continents. Other states have observed this closely. The risk going forward is that the next generation of major conflicts will be fought not between national armies but between corporate proxies, with no formal declarations of war, no clear legal framework, no obvious mechanism for de-escalation, and no democratic process through which ordinary citizens can say they want no part of it. The people caught in the
And the
middle of all this
consequences?
are not abstractions.
Irreversible.
They
We
are
proceed.
the villagers in the Central African Republic who described being afraid of men with no flag. They are the families in Baghdad who waited 12 years for a partial answer to why their father or mother or child died in Nisr Square. They are the communities in Mali and Sudan and Libya who cannot tell the difference between a security force and a threat because the men carrying the guns have made themselves deliberately impossible to identify. They live with consequences that the clients who signed the contracts will never have to face. Here is what we know. Private military companies are operating in active conflict zones on every inhabited continent. Documented abuses have occurred in multiple countries. International law does not adequately govern them. The governments that use them often prefer that it stays that way. The industry is growing, and the events of June 2023 inches Russia demonstrated that private military power, once built, does not always stay pointed in the direction intended. Here is what we do not fully know. The complete client lists of currently active companies, the full chain of command in most active deployments, the total human cost across all theaters, the extent to which governments that publicly condemn private military abuses are quietly relying on private military capability themselves. The question this documentary started with was about control. Who controls men with guns when no country claims them? After everything we have covered, the honest answer is that often, nobody does. And in a world where armed force without accountability has historically ended in tragedy, that is not a detail. That is the whole story. If you want to keep pulling on this thread, the next video in this series is waiting for you now. It is called The Wagner Group: Rise, Mutiny, and What Comes After. It picks up exactly where we left off and goes deeper into how one private army reshaped the geopolitics of an entire continent. Click it now. The story is not finished. This documentary drew on reporting from Reuters, the BBC, the Associated Press, and the New York Times, as well as academic research by P.W. Singer and Deborah Vaunt, investigative work by Bellingcat and the Century, United Nations Panel of Experts reports, and United States government documents, including Congressional Budget Office findings and Department of Justice proceedings. All allegations against individuals or organizations are presented as reported or alleged unless supported by a court conviction. This script reflects publicly available information at the time of writing. No political position is intended. This channel receives no funding from any defense, government, or private security organization.